Listen, I haven't done a LinkedIn Live in a little bit. I think since I did the LinkedIn Accelerator program. So I am happy to be back live again, talking about a very important topic. So to start, I am Flo Nicholas. I'm the co-founder of DEI Directive, and we are all things people analytics. Our goal is to help organizations leverage data analytics to help them build top performing teams that are inclusive and profitable and productive. Who doesn't want that? And so, but listen, there's a lot going on. We know great resignation, quiet quitting, quick quitting, grumpy while at work. Now I just read about loud quitting. So clearly there's a problem. And we're going to talk more about that today. And I'm excited to have my guest, Craig Fisher. Craig, you are like, I mean, first of all, best-selling author. Let's just start there. Okay. And I love the title of the book. It's called Hiring Humans. And one of the things you say is like essentially how to grow your business with kindness and empathy.
Mhm.
So you are essentially the CEO of Talent Net Media. So I just wanted, before we dive in, give you an opportunity to just tell people who you are.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Flo. I'm an admirer of yours and have watched your work over the last couple of years grow and flourish, and just proud to be here with you today. My name's Craig Fisher, and I am, as Flo said, the CEO of TalentNet Media. And what TalentNet Media does is help employers fix their recruitment process and talent attraction strategies. So, in a former life years ago, people ask me to do social media posting and job enhancements to attract talent and all the marketing things that are fun and pretty. But as I got more experienced in doing this over the last several years, I've said, listen, if you can't convert those people at the bottom of the funnel, let me fix that first. And so now I fix recruitment process and technology issues. And we do a candidate experience audit and look at what does it feel like to apply to a job at your company, to get hired at your company, to get onboarded at your company. And if there's hitches in that road that get people not to convert, to drop out of the process at any point, we fix that first, and then we'll put icing on the cake for talent attraction.
Yeah, all the nitty-gritty stuff that we want to talk about today, you're doing it and you're helping organizations.
Right.
So, I mean, one of the things I'm noticing, which is kind of like a little bit scary, just looking at data from Gallup, which really kind of paints a concerning picture, right?
Mhm.
There's probably only about 32%, and this number is coming out from 2022. Uh, 32% of full and part-time US employees are engaged at work, just 32 who are engaged. Uh, so that means the rest are not engaged. And we're further seeing that employee disengagement leads to almost like 50% increase in turnover rates.
Right.
Wow, that's a
Yeah.
lot.
We're starting to see a lot of tweets and posts and hashtags about boredom at work. And I'll give an example. Someone I know very well who might actually live in my house is in the HR space and doesn't have enough to do. And they pay her a great deal of money. So she's volunteered to kind of step up her role and do other things and do, be in lean in groups and things like that. And there's a lot of that going on, but employers who aren't cognizant of the fact that there's a lot of distance between the communication of the company and what the employee is doing should be looking into this and inspiring people to join those ERGs and do other things across the organization to learn more of the business, because essentially businesses have to move people around at some point in order to grow as an organization. And so if people are just leaving, that doesn't really help your problem. That's just expensive.
Right. And let's talk about that a little bit more, right? Because one of the things that Idea Directive we really stress heavily is to get in front of the problem, right? It's like don't wait for things to happen. Like, oh my God, we've just lost like 70% of our workers, right? It's to kind of get ahead of that to prevent that, right?
Mhm.
Um, what are you hearing from the organizations, or what are you seeing in terms of organizations really putting processes in place, specifically leveraging data to
Mhm.
get understanding of like, well, how do our employees feel?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's a lot of layoffs happening, right, over the last several months of regular, right, workers at all levels, which in turn leads to layoffs within human resources and the talent organizations of these companies. And so when you're understaffed in the people part of the organization, it's very difficult to, be all over how do our employees feel and what can we do to make them more engaged because you're scrambling just to get things done at this point right now. And so employee surveys are always a good idea on a regular basis and don't make them just your standard would you refer our organization to a friend type of survey. Do something different. Engage them. What are other things you're interested in? How do you feel? Right, like things like that, and really start to encourage employees to tell their stories to the company first, and then if there are high points, um, take those stories and ask them, would you be interested in making a quick video to talk about what's good about the organization and share that with the outside world? Then you highlight the employee, you get a kind of a day in the life, and you start to understand the percentage of your population internally that is engaged or could be engaged with just a little bit of encouragement. Those numbers right there are key because just like with any list, with any kind of sales organization, you've got lifers, you've got people who are going to be permanent subscribers to your organization. And that's what you really want. You want to treat these people as if they're your most valued customers, and they should be.
Right. And so I guess the days off pizza parties and hey, look at the parking spot you got. Are I guess people just don't really care about those anymore, right?
Well, so it's funny. Companies do cheesy online things now,
Yeah.
right? And they have these sort of HR happy hour experiences where you get together and you hear from different parts of the organization, and sometimes you have to wear a silly hat or a
Yeah.
Hawaiian shirt or right, whatever. And while those things might be complained about, they are still effective. Um, Try to do a little better job than just reading a script
Right.
to your company, right? Try to have more of a conversation and pick someone from the organization that's maybe not your typical leader, that maybe is just an average person, and ask to hear from them. I mean, engage everyone as much as you can. And these, water coolers. I go to my wife's office and have lunch very often, and she just lives in an office downstairs from my office, basically all day,
Right.
right? So I call her office our lunchroom and our break room,
Yeah.
and told her I'm going to get her a water cooler. But that's kind of the world we live in right now.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you make a great point, right? I think one of the things that we saw a lot out of, especially all these movements that I mentioned in a Great Resignation, is that you know employees are no longer afraid to be vocal, right? They're
Hmm.
no longer afraid to leave, essentially.
Right.
And this new movement that I just told you about, that I was reading a CNBC article, which, well, one, you have people who are grumpy at work, and then the other one is you have people who are loudly quitting. And people who are loud, it's essentially what that means is now
Hmm.
that they're upset, and on the exit, before they exit, they're gonna ensure, I guess before and after the exit, they're gonna ensure to potentially do harm
Right.
to the reputation of the organization.
Yeah.
And I don't think this is something that organizations should take lightly. And the article actually said, loudly quitting is actually worse
Oh yeah.
than quiet quitting. So let's talk through this and how organizations should, if they're not really paying attention to data analytics right now, why they should be really fully paying attention to understanding who's in their organization, and whether they're going to quit quietly, loudly, or be grumpy.
So a couple of things that I've always expressed to employers is that your Glassdoor score or your Indeed score or any of these online rating systems that employees have access to can be easily improved, right?
Mm. Yeah.
So grumpy employees are just like grumpy customers. It's really only the grumpy ones who leave scathing reviews,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Happy customers who maybe even just aren't buying anymore, but like the company just fine, they're not leaving scathing reviews, and in fact, they rarely review anything at all. And so, if you say to your organization, listen, when people leave the organization, whether it's a voluntary leaver or an involuntary leaver, let's do a little more for them on the way out. Okay, let's not have their last meeting with an HR person and a security officer, whether it's online
Mm.
or in person. Let's have one last meeting with their manager to say, we appreciate you. Thank you for what you've done here. I mean, unless it's something terrible, right? But and then with those voluntary leavers that you might want back, um, have the manager send them a card, a personal note, and maybe even include a $5 Starbucks card, right? And say, listen, when you get settled in your next thing, um, give me a ring and let's catch up. I want to know how you're doing, and buy some coffee on me and give me a few minutes of your time. And that tiny little thing right there
Yeah.
would and can, and I have seen done, improve ratings reviews scores by 2 or 3 points within a 6 month period. I mean,
Wow.
it's as simple as that. Costs almost nothing, just a little bit of time and intentionality.
Yeah, and can we just clone you and just put you in every organization? Because like, because that's like the empathetic, the human side, and being like human centric, right?
Right,
It's not a hey, I quit, and you're like, let us help you pack up your office. See you later, right?
right.
So I love the fact that you mentioned that, and that actually leads me into the other important aspect of why collecting people analytics is really crucial, because one of the definitions that I like is that people analytics is the practice of collecting and transforming HR data and organizational data into
Hmm.
actionable insights that improve the way you do business. And for me, it's that word, that actionable, that is so crucial.
Right.
And one thing that I see when an organization is leaving is some organizations are still not conducting exit interviews.
Right. Yeah. And as part of that, I mean, what I just described, a meeting with the manager, could be sort of replicated in an exit interview, right? Whether they are talking to those people or sending a survey or whatever, right? But some of that personal attention to detail and some of that we care about you stuff can be done in all of those situations. But you're right. Some organizations are not listening on the way out. And we've all experienced it. You voice your concerns about the company in that exit interview, assuming that it's private, never to be heard by the person you might be complaining about or whatever. So that leaves a delicate balance. How do you act on that information, right, without upsetting the apple cart internally and keeping that privacy concern? Um, how do you anonymize that data and then do something with it? And most organizations, I'll be honest with you, Flo, don't know their numbers at all.
Mm.
They don't understand how many. If you asked a hiring leader or a talent leader today, how many people are currently employed by your company? Most of them can't answer that to the number, right? How many people do you need on a monthly basis to produce the products that you need to produce or services in order to stay afloat as an organization or to be profitable? What is your churn on a regular basis? And then how many people does that leave that you need to hire on a monthly basis in order to make all these things happen? Where are your hotspots in the country? When are your upcoming events like back to school or seasonal events where you need to do extra hiring? You should have all that information at a fingertip, right? So that you know exactly what you need in order to say, okay, do we need to do upskilling of our employees and internal mobility versus hiring? But if you can't answer those simple questions about who do we have, what do they do, uh, how many do we need, and what's the difference
Right.
between with the churn. It's hard to do.
Right, just that lack of monitoring the trends, that
That's
are
right.
going on in the organization, whether it's, like you mentioned, what's our busiest time, coverage, right? Because sometimes that's what happens. I was at the dollar store yesterday, although I don't it's not the dollar store anymore. I think it's now $1.25.
Yeah.
Um, and my older daughter needed some posters. And as we're just walking down the aisles, one of the employees was visibly upset. And she was on the phone, swearing, talking about an incident that just happened with another coworker.
Mm.
And one of the, and of course I'm shocked because I'm also with my 4-year-old and my 11-year-old, but I understood her pain,
Yeah.
right? Because she's coming into work in a toxic environment.
Tough environment in the first place, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And she said, and whoever she was talking to, she said, I can't wait to get that other job. So that means not only is she disengaged,
Hmm.
she's already looking for work, right? So she's got one foot
Yeah.
out the door.
Yeah, and at a retail level, it's especially hard because you've got so many employees and there's so much turnover. And dollar store, I just saw a pretty bad article about the warehousing environment there about them. They've got some challenges, right? And so at the store level and at the warehouse level, you've got to have leaders who care enough to actually listen to their employees and talk to them and try to get past and ahead of the hour to hour mayhem and chaos that's happening, and try to step back. And this is a top down thing. You have to ask your organization at the management level to say, we are going to think about people first here. And
Yeah.
even though we're chasing our tails right now and the world's on fire, we are going to think about people first, and we're going to listen, and we're going to do the right things. And it takes a mountain of effort to do it.
No, it does. And Chad Johnson said, most organizations don't understand how their hiring criteria is limiting their talent acquisition.
Right.
So
Yeah. So we do a candidate experience audit for employers that says we're going to apply to your jobs on every platform, through every job board, through every kind of device, and see and feel what it's like to get an application done with your company. Do I hit a paywall where I have to sign in order to just apply? And would I remember the email address that I used the next time, right, to get back there?
yeah,
All these things that are limiting factors, including assessments and including requirements, like Chad says, aren't always necessary, right? You can do a quick apply with very few impediments right up front, and then go back to that candidate later and say, hey, we need you to fill out some of the rest of this stuff. But start
mhm,
looking at limiting those assessments, start looking at limiting those criteria. Drug tests are a big controversial issue right now. Half the states in the country have legalized marijuana.
mhm.
And so, right, what do you do with that? And
Right.
it's still a good idea, but the way you go about it and the way that you approach the communication about it is also critical.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, and I think that can lead us into this path of how organizations, the self audit to check their internal systems that
Mhm.
are externally facing, right?
Yeah.
To determine any potential, bias and discrimination, right? Because that's the other issue that we seem to hear a lot about. I know
Yeah.
recently the EOC just settled a uh, it was a lawsuit or pending claim where a company was using AI
Hmm.
for hiring. So some
Yeah.
type of AI hiring software. And I guess the claim was essentially that what was going on is some discrimination based on ageism,
Yeah.
right? So let's kind of dive into that a little bit, how organizations can be, and should be very cautious. Um,
Yeah.
in terms
So
of potential bias and discrimination?
some of these lawsuits and regulations started in California and Illinois, and kind of go back to things like pay transparency, and it kind of all started there a few years back. And this notion of AI and bias has now been formalized in a couple of different states. Most recently, in the city of New York, with a ruling called NYC 144, which says that you may get audited um, about the tools you're using, anything that is automation or AI based, and have to prove that it's not including bias or introducing bias into your process. And then it will take a mathematical uh, situation where it says, of the people who applied to your jobs, how many got hired who were X, Y, and Z, gender, race, etc. And so now it's incumbent upon employers to ask their vendors who supply the tools that might have bias in them to audit themselves, and have that audit report available to the employer at a given notice. So uh, this is tricky, but there is bias in every tool. And even your applicant tracking system, I see Chad's kind of talking about applicant tracking systems. Um, they have sort of standard out of the box verbiage that doesn't feel good when you receive the automated message back to your email after applying to a job. It's very, sometimes very terse, sometimes very boring, sometimes there's nothing at all. And even with your best efforts to improve that stuff, occasionally things break and they go back to default, or right, they're just not working. And so if you're not looking at what it feels like to be a candidate on a regular basis, the timing of the communication, the feeling of the communication, is there any communication, right? All of these things lead to a better customer experience or candidate experience. And the biggest problem with recruiting and talent organizations and HR is turnover. People leave, and then those processes that were in place, even if there's good documentation, and Monday.com, is all over the place with notes and things. It's hard to get back to where that good path was going sometimes. And so you kind of get a fresh slate, or the vendor reps turnover, your customer service rep at your ATS vendor might change, and things just break. And so you have to look, you have to have eyes on this all the time.
Right. Yeah. And that's one of the things that, when I'm speaking with HR leaders from various organizations, I'm also going to obviously promote DI Directive here. One of the things that we like is the fact that, um, you have it's a software, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
SaaS. It's sitting on cloud, right? So gone are the days where you're downloading reports onto an employee's computer, right? As
Yeah.
you mentioned, that employee leaves, what happens? Now you're trying to see how you can retrieve those files, trying to retrieve that data. And we saw this happening, during COVID, where everybody's now at home, and now people are trying to access, all these files, which are, essentially sitting on each employee's individual computers. And hence the whole tech sector blew up, because now people are realizing the fact of, hey, we've got to collect data in a way that's easily accessible
Mm-hmm.
for all people. No matter if you're in Hawaii or you take a trip to Japan, I can still have access to the data. And that's one of the things that, why we're always saying, hey, people analytics data is so important, and having it to be able to be easily accessible. So if I have to report to a stakeholder and say, listen, I'm noticing a trend. We're losing a lot of XYZ employees in our organization. Here's the report. Or, hey, I'm noticing a trend in our exit interviews. I'm noticing a trend with we're losing veterans. Here's the report.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it comes back to what I said earlier, is arming the organization with the ability to make actionable decisions based on that data. Uh, but why are some organizations still falling behind? I get it. We have the layoffs going on, but with all this technology that's on the market, I guess I'm
Mhm.
trying to understand, uh, how do we make that business case justification from your perspective to say you need the people analytics?
Yeah, so it's an education thing, right? And you start with those questions I asked earlier. How many people do you currently employ? How many people do you need? Right? And if you've got a population of diverse candidates that you want to make sure that you're keeping up with, what's the purpose behind that? Is it just fairness? Is it just inclusion? Is it just transparency? And those are all good reasons. And if you've got a certain population of veterans, for instance, which I love your, for instance, there, um, they've got different needs, right? And different family situations and different personas than other parts of your population. And you need to understand each of them. All of your employee groups are not the same. They're not all in the sales department even all the same. And so you need to be building personas for each of these different types of groups and then figuring out how you can answer what their needs and wants are with what your company offers. This works the same for attracting candidates. Now, here's where that data part comes in to inform employers about the technology that they're either lacking or the analytics that they're not tracking. How do you know who you're talking to
Mm,
and where your sources of good employees are coming from if you can't track things all the way through to the hire? So you put an ad on Indeed and somebody gets hired. Do you have a direct correlation there or do you not? Right. I mean, it's
right.
almost as simple as that. And so if I say to you as an organization, how many people do you currently employ? And you don't know. And then I say, well, where do most of your employees come from? And you don't know.
Yeah.
All right. Well, how do you attract veterans? And oh, well, we use this one website. Well, okay. What's the percentage of people you hire from that website versus your entire employee population? I mean, there are very straightforward questions to say, you need better information. And there are simple ways to do it. Light tech, spot tech, like these SaaS platforms that you're discussing right now, are very often a very good attachment to a larger system. You might be stuck with your workday system for the next forever, but that doesn't mean you have to live with sending someone to a login screen every time they try to apply or access their application that doesn't work half the time. There are better ways. There's light technology to help you track and have a better candidate experience and employee experience that you
Right.
can add to that ATS.
Yeah. And for anybody who's listening in, if you have any questions, please make sure you just drop them in the chat. To your comment, Chad Johnson said, I call it the Xerox effect. Organizations continue to try and copy the people they consider top performers in their organizations. And the problem is that there's little diversity in this lens, and you'll only get what you already have. And Chad, that's a great point, because one of the things that we're also seeing is there's ample data that shows that organizations that are more diverse and inclusive are, again, making more money, more innovative, and more creative. So I think, to your point, Craig, I think it goes to that continuous education piece,
Mhm.
right, as to why it's critical to be leveraging this data to improve the workplace conditions.
If you've got diverse employees, right, and you're not asking them in the same way that you're asking your non-diverse employees to refer their friends to the organization, you're doing your company a disservice, right? And a lot of times, the referral programs that get rolled out are email based, right? And if you've got a segment of warehouse people or truck drivers or whatever that don't check their email or don't look at their email, well, how are you communicating that to them? How are you encouraging them to refer their friends? I did a project with a big warehouse in outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for Ross Dress for Less, and there were 26 different languages spoken in that warehouse.
Wow.
Do you think they're reading that referral program
Yeah.
email?
Yeah.
I don't think so. And a poster A poster in the warehouse is okay with a QR code, but there are better ways. Everybody, almost to a person, checks text messages, for instance.
Right. Yeah, I think you definitely bring up a good point. Is that ensuring that when you are sending out those messages, that all your employees are receiving them, and not just a select few,
Hmm.
right? And I think it also goes to what we always talk about here at DI Directive is when organizations are creating these mission statements and essentially stating that they're inclusive, that it's not just a statement, right?
Right.
It's not a window dressing, is
Yeah.
that there's some substance behind those statements, because then you end up having employees feeling left out. And hence why we encourage having the employee surveys. And speaking about employee surveys, I had a call with an organization, and one of the things that I asked, well, hey, I'm curious, how often are you sending out the employee surveys? And they said once a year.
Yeah.
Right. And I was like, oh, okay. But internally, I'm like, oh my God, a lot goes on in a year. I feel like, you need to be doing them more than that.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm curious as to your opinion.
Hmm.
How often should organizations be doing employee surveys?
All right. So there are different types, right? And I call this the ramp up effect to happiness.
Mhm.
Uh, you first of all want to survey people as soon as they're hired because that's the best they're ever going to feel about it. Okay. So as soon as they're hired, how did that feel? How was the experience of getting, um, through the application and hired? And tell us all about it. What were the good things? And what do you feel like your impact on the organization is going to be? Even though you haven't been here long, what do you
Right.
think about that? Right. And then ask them if you could take part of those positive comments and ask them to put it on Glassdoor or Indeed or LinkedIn. Here, push this button and share your comments there if you want to. You don't have to, but if you want to, do that. And then ask them again once they've been onboarded, 3 or 4 weeks in. How's it going? How did it feel? How are you feeling now? And then every month after that. And then the whole employee population, at least quarterly, if you ask me.
Right. No, you bring up a good point, and Chad, I love it. You are engaged today, Chad. Thank you. So Chad said so many employees believe that their survey answers are not completely anonymous, and that their answers will be held against them.
Mhm.
And this actually comes up a lot. Where people ask me, "Well, how do we get employees to trust us,
Mhm.
uh, to know that we're using these surveys to improve, not to, as retaliation, for example?"
So you have to build it into the culture of the organization of trust, right? And I did a project for a company recently where they wanted to rewrite their core values because they had acquired multiple other organizations and they were all kind of on a different page. So they wanted to have some uniting core values. And the leadership of the organization wanted things in there like work hard, play hard, which really drives a wedge between employees and employers. And you can't do things like that. You have to, even at that level, core values, mission statements, have a people first attitude and an attitude of trust. And so, even in those direct um, surveys where you're asking them to share their innermost thoughts, say, please be frank with us. This is 100% anonymous. If you choose to go post something that you've written that's positive somewhere else, that's great. Thank you. But we will not hold anything against you. I mean, and just state it plainly.
Yeah.
And it's against our policy. We would get fired if we did that.
Yeah. Now you bring up a good point, and I think I have somebody here. They got a couple of questions, but we'll pick one. We'll
Okay.
pick one question here. All right. So it says, how can organizations ensure data accuracy and reliability when using people analytics to inform critical HR and business decisions?
Mhm. So this is as much a you question, Flo, as it is a me question. But the reality is, your data is usually not 100% accurate, right? You're going to get as close to the truth as you can, and you need to have 3 or 4 different ways to ensure that that's the case. So you can't just rely on source information, right? So if Indeed is telling you this and your marketing agency is telling you that, and right, all the numbers look different, that's probably because they're measuring things differently. So you have to standardize what the measurement's going to be for your organization. And that's the first and foremost thing, because everyone that you're relying on to give you numbers is skewing that to their benefit when
Right.
they're your outside vendor.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on. I think data is data, and I always say there's a plus or minus in
Yeah.
terms of accuracy, right? I'll go back to what you said earlier is the audits, right? Because you can check for any potential inefficiencies when you're looking at your data, and that's well, first of all, you've got to be looking at your data in the first place, right? And not just collecting it. And I think those audits of comparing to ensure that, hey, there's a consistency with the information that we're getting. Because if you know, at one point for example, you do a survey and there's a large percentage of people who are not happy and it's coming up 80%. And then you haven't done anything, but all of a sudden now there's 100% people in your company happy, then you kind of want to trust, like, well, wait a minute, I thought people weren't happy. All of a sudden now this month there's 100% people happy, and we haven't made any effort to make our employees happy. So
Right.
maybe somebody's playing around with our data. So just that data, it's like with anything, quality check,
Mhm.
right, is definitely critical.
Quality check who's answering the surveys, right?
Exactly.
And what percentage of respondents are you getting? Most of this stuff you can get with email and SMS measurements, right? I mean, what are
Right.
your percentage of open rates and clicks and things like that? But you do have to build into the process, just like with any drip marketing campaign, landing pages and things where that data can actually be collected, and a pixel on a thank you page, right? How do
Right.
you know, right, what people are at? Even if you're anonymizing the data, it doesn't matter. If you've got a consistent percentage of users responding, then that's one thing. But if you start seeing statistical anomalies,
Yeah.
something's going on. Yeah.
That's going on, right? And who has access to that data, right? I think that's the other thing that is critical, ensuring that it's not just open,
Hmm.
for everyone. That there are some people who have more authority, maybe admin authority than others. Which again, promoting our software gives the capability where you can select who actually has the ability to play around with the data to ensure that you're not having, as I call it, too many chefs in the kitchen
Hmm.
who might compromise the flavor of your dish, right?
Well, and I've seen this before, where you hire an analytics person and they're building out their spreadsheets, and you have to ask them questions as well. Wait, why is this way? Because they'll do it the way they were taught,
Right,
right? And that might not get at the answer that you actually want. And you don't want to skew the data to the answer, the outcome, but you want to encourage whoever is normalizing the data to ensure that you're doing it to understand the best outcomes for the organization. So
right.
if right, and generally it's got to be somebody almost at the CEO level who has the knowledge of, what kind of statistics do we need in order for this organization to run. Board members are good at this too. But you can't just rely on the 27-year-old analytics person in your company to say this is what's real.
Right. And I'm sorry, just like right as we're talking, there's a fly that's attacking me here. So he doesn't want to hear about the data. um, so I see a comment that came up that makes a great point, which is also we need to make sure that the HR staff are
Yeah.
trained in proper data collection techniques, right? So I can have all this reporting capabilities, but one, do I even understand what it means? Do I
Mhm.
even understand how to report it? So I think that's an excellent point, Nikki.
Yeah, Nikki, I think that regular training for the HR and talent organizations on things like data analytics and understanding why it matters is very important. And just because you can make a pivot table doesn't mean you really understand what your people analytics say.
Right. And you mentioned the CEO earlier. I want to kind of get back to that because one of the things that I hear a lot of people say, and a lot of studies are always saying that um, to essentially build these inclusive workplaces and top
Mhm.
performing teams and ensure that, again, HR professionals, who else, whoever's in charge of collecting this data is actually doing what they have to do.
Mhm.
It starts from the top. It starts with the buy-in from the top to make it clear that, hey, this is critical. These are the processes that need to be in place. These are the expectations. There's going to be accountability, and we're going to have transparency.
Mhm.
So, how do we get the buy-in from
Yeah.
the top?
So data is always going to be critical there, right? And if you say, I've audited our process, and in the case of, let's say, trying to hire people, you find that I searched for jobs like ours on Indeed and Google, and we come up way down the list. I mean, every one of our competitors is coming up higher than us. And that's probably costing us $500,000 a year in ad spend. Okay, that's a good reason for a CEO to set up and say, why is that? Figure it out and fix it. So that sort of data speaks to the executive team. And
Right,
if you can't understand, like the statistical anomaly you said, last month 80% of people were angry and this month 100% of people are happy. That's not real.
right,
Right, this sort of thing is costing us money, and there's a formula for that. So not understanding your data is costly, and if you can figure out and attach a number to it, that's how you speak to the leadership team.
right. And as you're saying that, I'm reminded of the costs. So here are some of the research that I've seen. For a small business with 250 employees, low employee engagement can cost them more than 3 million per year,
Mhm.
right? So when we're talking about at the C-suite level, getting the CEO involved, I feel like when it comes to revenue and losing revenue, it almost seems like you also have to bring in the CFO, right? That seems like that's the number person. Is the CFO supposed to also be involved in this to say,
Oh
hey,
yeah,
we're losing money here,
yeah.
and it's because of our workplace lack of culture, essentially.
Yes, and when you do that, when you get involved at the CFO level, and then you bring in your HRIS team and your shared services person from IT, right? And you've got all these people on the same call, and you show that data, you can affect change. And one of the things that I like as a good example is, all right, if we can improve employee engagement by a quarter, right? Um, by 25%. So that's several $100,000. Okay. We could use that money to spend on better communication with our employees to improve this long term. Right. I mean, so half of our employees don't read emails. Do we need a text solution or something else? And a little bit of tech and process improvement goes a long way. So if you can prove that you can save money with the data by improving the organization somewhere, if you have budget in something and you don't spend it, it goes away, right? The
Right,
next year they're going to say, no, you don't need that. But if you have a good reason to spend it on something that will earn continuous improvement, then you're going in the right direction.
right. And I'm under attack here, so sorry if I'm doing some kung fu moves here. This fly is relentless. Let me just finish this LinkedIn live, please. Um, so the ROI seems like that's going to be a good business case justification for whether it's an HR professional or chief diversity officer or chief Jedi officer or chief people officer.
Yes.
Um, it seems like that's what it needs to be made. And I'm going to add to this. In 2022, the EOC settled over $500 million
Hmm.
in workplace bias and discrimination lawsuits. And for me, that's one thing I'm starting to really push out to organizations I'm speaking with is yes, of course, I want them to lead with kindness and empathy and be human centric and really essentially want to create inclusive workplaces because it's the moral thing to do.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, sometimes that narrative doesn't always get you that the
Right.
buy-in right away. But I feel like if you change that narrative to the financial, ramifications
Yeah.
of back off, um, that it almost feels like that's the story that you got to tell.
There's good data and repeatedly good data that diverse organizations perform better, right? I mean, it's
Right.
that simple. And you can dive into as much complexity of that as you want, but the bottom line is that. And that has to be reminded a lot to
Yeah.
people, right? And study after study by IBM and Deloitte and you name it
Right.
shows this, and it's pretty indisputable. So, um, anyone who wants to try to fight hard to dispute that is maybe not the right leader.
Right. Well said. Yeah. Well said. So we're kind of cutting down on time here. I just wanted, what is the one golden nugget? And the fly is attacking me. So it's like, ah! And this is, listen, Mr. Fly, this is being recorded here. You're killing my cuteness here. Um, what is the golden nugget here for organizations that are still like, yeah, sometimes we collect data, sometimes we don't. Um, but you've mentioned so many goodies here about the audits, about the surveys. Now, how do they then all take that into one little package and just start? Like, no more excuses,
Mhm.
just get it done.
Yeah, so I'm a big believer, Flo, in consistency over time, right? Take your own social media posts. If you decide to go away because you took a job and you're not out there being yourself and being in people's peripheral vision and contributing to your network and your audience on a regular basis because you're busy with your new job, you're doing yourself a disservice. And it's the same with organizations and doing their regular analytics check-ins. You know, test the pulse of your people on a regular basis and be consistent with it over time and message to them that you're a human and people first organization and do the things to back that up. And look, if it's right now once a year that you're even checking or caring to check and you improve that to twice a year, that's a good start. But here's the thing, if you don't start understanding your numbers and where your people come from and why they stay or they leave today, a year from now you'll really wish you had, because your competitors will beat you on a regular basis.
It's a competitive market, and the statistics show that, and employees want to work for organizations that are inclusive, that are diverse, where they're respected, have a voice, have opportunities to grow. So I think you make a great point. So I'm curious, going to your book,
Mhm.
what made you decide to write your book? And tell
Uh,
people little details about what you get into it and where they can find it.
All right. So right up front, you can find it at hiring-humans.com. And for me, I do a lot of training and I do a lot of webinars and whatnot. And I host conferences every year, twice a year in Texas, called TalentNet Live. The next one's coming up in November, talentnetlive.com. And I've got all these stories from employers, right? I do this work with employers. And I also work with the technology vendors, the analytics companies, the recruitment marketing companies, the talent management organizations, all of these RPOs, you name it. And so I've got stories from the connection between people, process, and technology that kind of build a fantastic arc of how do you start and how do you get to where you're good in a company, to have that empathy for your people and your potential people, right? Your on deck
Yeah.
circle, the people who are not yet employed there, in mind, and communicate that on a regular basis. And I finally just had the right stories in the right order in my head to put it down on paper. And this being kind of a slow hiring year gave me a good opportunity to crystallize that.
Right. Yeah, I love that. And Nikki said, I love this clear communication and consistency, transparency, and authenticity because we hire humans, right? We're all humans. And at the end of the day, that's what I hear a lot from people I speak to. I just want to be noticed and recognized for me, you know?
Yeah, in this age of automation and AI and people online complaining that they just don't hear back and they're ghosted on a regular
Yeah.
basis, we're automating our way out of a good relationship. So my book has all about how to use those tools, but to keep the human touch in the process.
Yeah. And I love it. I love it. This has been a phenomenal discussion. And definitely for anybody who wants to hire with that human touch, they need to definitely check out your book, which is Hiring Humans. And again, I love how essentially your slogan is how to grow your business with kindness and empathy, which, by the way, it looks like it's a #1 Amazon bestseller.
In multiple categories has been,
Okay. All
yeah.
right,
So
Craig. Well done.
yeah,
Congratulations on that.
thank you.
And listen, thank you for saying, hey, Flo, of course, I'll come join you. I sent you a message and you didn't blink. You didn't say, let me get back to you or let me get my assistant to get back to you. So I definitely appreciate it. Let's do this again. We're going to continue the series. I guess really what we want to just do is showcase the need to create these better workplaces. It's possible. The data, like you mentioned, and we discussed, is out there. What happens when organizations are able to leverage data and people analytics and create these inclusive workplaces where everybody belongs? Amazing things happen. You increase your revenue, right? You have employees that are engaged and happy and productive. So stay tuned for more of these DI Directive series. We're going to bring in more HR experts, and we're going to talk about people analytics because, like Craig said, we need that consistency. So that's why we're going to continue to talk about it. We got to educate because a lot of organizations still don't understand the benefit. Any last words before you go? And Vivian said, thank you for an insightful discussion. Well, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Flo. It's great to see you. I will see you in Vegas at HR Tech.
Oh, you're going to be there. Yes. I get to see you in person. All right.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Let's make sure we connect so we can meet up.
Thanks everybody for joining us.